Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really incredible story about logistics, sheer ingenuity, and how the forgotten superhighways of the 18th century were the key to one of the first major victories of the American Revolution.
So just think about this question for a second. It's the dead of winter, 1775, and this is the impossible problem facing the Continental Army. See, they're besieging the British in Boston, but without any heavy firepower, it's a stalemate they're pretty much guaranteed to lose. And the only answer, well, it was 300 miles away, across a brutal landscape of frozen lakes, raging rivers, and snow-choked mountains.
I want you to just picture this scene. It's New Year's Day. You've got this former bookseller, a guy named Henry Knox, staring at the Hudson River. Behind him, a priceless train of heavy cannons is completely stalled out in 3 feet of snow. And in front of him, the river ice is way too thin to support even one of them. The entire mission, and maybe the fate of the whole revolution, is hanging in the balance, right there on that frozen riverbank.
Okay, so to really get the gravity of what Knox was trying to do, we've got to back up a little and look at the map of 18th century warfare. The roads we think of today, they just didn't exist back then. No, the real highways, they were made of water.
And what's so fascinating is this corridor. It wasn't just a couple of lakes and rivers. This thing was the strategic superhighway of the entire continent. It ran all the way from the St. Lawrence River, down through Lake Champlain, Lake George, and then the Hudson River. This was, hands down, the fastest and most direct route for moving armies and supplies between Canada and the colonies.
So the most important spot on this whole highway was this one choke point, Fort Ticonderoga. The name literally means the land between two waters, and you can see why. For generations, the British, the French, and now the Americans fought tooth and nail for this fort. If you controlled Ticonderoga, you controlled the highway. Simple as that.
And wow, does this illustrate the stakes? I mean, look at this. How a commander chose to use this waterway could mean the difference between a stunning victory, like the one Knox pulled off, and a totally catastrophic, war-altering defeat, which is exactly what General Burgoyne suffered just a year later by abandoning this very same route.
All right, so let's get back to the mission itself. It was a journey so ambitious and so vital that it actually became known as the Noble Train of Artillery. So the situation in Boston was pretty dire. Washington's army had the British surrounded. Yeah, but it was basically a bluff. The British had ships, they had cannons, the Americans had muskets. Washington desperately needed big guns. So he commissioned a 25-year-old former bookseller, Henry Knox, to go get them from the recently captured Fort Ticonderoga.
And the haul Knox was tasked with bringing back was impressive. 59 captured artillery pieces. We're talking heavy brass and iron cannons, mortars, the whole shebang.
Now, the scale of this is just hard to wrap your head around. Many of these cannons, individually, weighed over a ton. That's more than 2,000 pounds of solid iron each.
And he had to move this whole 60-ton arsenal, a whopping 300 miles, from upstate New York all the way to Boston, in the absolute worst part of a brutal New England winter. By any measure, this was a completely impossible task.
So what happened next wasn't just some logistical challenge. No, it was an absolute epic battle against the elements. It was a masterclass in just pure, stubborn perseverance.
For 56 grueling days, Knox's expedition battled nature every single step of the way. I mean, they started by boat on Lake George, only to get slammed by heavy winds that grounded the fleet and even sank one of the boats. Then they hit the Hudson, followed by the seemingly impassable Berkshire Mountains, before they finally, somehow, stumbled into camp almost 2 full months later.
You can really get a sense of Knox's state of mind from his own diary. You could just feel the mix of complete exhaustion and this absolute iron-willed resolve in his words. He admits how uncertain everything was, that feeling that failure was just one blizzard away, but then he ends with that powerful line, "Please God, they must go."
And the obstacles were just relentless. On the water, it was terrible winds. On land, it was sledges and exhausted oxen just completely bogged down in massive snowdrifts. They had to cross the treacherous Hudson River not once but 4 separate times. And then, somehow, they had to haul all that iron up and over the steep, snow-covered Berkshire Mountains.
And all of this brings us back to the climax of the journey, the one moment that could have ended it all, Knox's standoff with the Hudson River.
So here's the problem. The ice is too weak. The entire mission is stalled. The revolution is literally waiting.
A lesser man would have packed it in, but what Henry Knox did next? Well, it was a brilliant and yet startlingly simple piece of environmental engineering.
The ingenuity here is just off the charts. Think about this. Knox ordered his men to start cutting holes in the ice. This let the river water flood up onto the surface, where the frigid winter air immediately started to refreeze it layer by painstaking layer. He was literally building a stronger bridge out of the river itself, forcing nature to solve the very problem that it had created.
And his wild gambit paid off. After 4 days of this back-breaking work, the entire artillery train crossed the Hudson. You can just imagine the scene when those cannons finally rolled into Cambridge in late January. The Continental Army could hardly believe their eyes. What everyone thought was impossible had actually been done.
And the impact? It was immediate. It was a complete game changer. Once those guns were secretly moved up onto Dorchester Heights, the balance of power shifted overnight. The cannons now looked down on the entire city and the harbor, making the British position completely indefensible. They basically had a choice: get obliterated or evacuate. They chose to get out, handing the Americans their first major victory of the war.
But you know, the story doesn't just end with one victory. The legacy of this incredible feat is so much bigger. It's a powerful lesson about strategy and the environment, a lesson that's basically etched right onto the landscape itself. And this is where the lesson really hits home. Just 1 year later, a British general named Burgoyne led his army down this exact same corridor. But instead of using the waterways, he chose a difficult overland route, plunging his entire army into the wilderness. He got bogged down, his supply lines were cut, and he was forced to surrender his entire army at Saratoga, a defeat that brought the French into the war and ultimately sealed Britain's fate. Knox understood the highway, Burgoyne ignored it. And what's really cool is that today you can actually follow in his footsteps. There are 56 historical markers that trace Knox's route from New York all the way to Massachusetts. This noble train created a path that you can still follow, a physical connection to this incredible moment in history, from Fort Ticonderoga to Cambridge Common. Knox's journey is just such a powerful reminder that the paths that shape history aren't always paved roads. So often they're the rivers, the trails, and the natural corridors that we've long since forgotten about. It really makes you wonder, right? What other hidden highways of history are out there, maybe right under our feet, just waiting to be rediscovered?